You can always win them back if you're willing to change yourself first. Anytime we try to control something that we cannot control, the tension mounts more and more and more. Because trust is low and safety is low, we don't feel free to talk about it. There are barriers in the communication based on mistrust and fear. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and continuing on the master topic of wrath and ruin, Old Testament tactics for marital meltdown. Today, we're going to cover commandments and control, the downfall of overbearing expectations. We're going to explore the negative impacts of imposing rigid expectations or rules on a partner, which lead to feelings of oppression, loss of autonomy, and resistance in the relationship. And as has become the custom in this series, we're going to begin with a story about none other than Jack and Emily. And please remember that any resemblance to real life is an accident, unintended, and the names, of course, have been changed to protect the innocent. In a charming town filled with laughter and sweet scent of blooming flowers, Jack and Emily's love continued to grow. They had faced many trials and tribulations, learning and growing stronger as a couple with each challenge they overcame. However, a new obstacle soon emerged: the weight of overbearing expectations and the desire for control. Jack, in his quest to create the perfect relationship, began to impose rigid expectations on Emily. He set strict rules for how they should spend their time, manage their finances, and even communicate with one another. You see, Jack had not fully recovered from Emily's infidelity, and so he made rules like we should be able to check each other's devices at any time. We should have access to all of each other's emails. We should have the ability to know where each other are at any given time. He made sure that their phones had tracking on it, so he always knew where Emily was, and Emily always knew where he was. Jack believed that by controlling every aspect of their lives, he could guarantee the success of their relationship. Emily, however, began to feel just a little suffocated, as you might imagine. She longed for the freedom to make her own choices, to feel trusted, and express herself authentically. The more Jack attempted to control her, the more she resisted, leading to feelings of oppression and resentment. As the tension between them mounted, Jack and Emily found themselves locked in a power struggle, with each pushing back against the other's attempts to control their relationship. Their once happy home was now, once again, a battleground filled with arguments and frustration. This time, Emily served Jack with divorce papers and moved to her mother's house. That's right. Emily was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Jack turned to the Unbreakable Husband program to learn how to win Emily back, because what he remembered was that you can always win them back if you're willing to change yourself first. First, he took responsibility and declared that he was making a change. He declared it to Emily. He said that he would no longer attempt to control her and that he had gotten help. And furthermore, that should there be any recurrence, he would make up for it, be held responsible for it, and continue to change and grow. Jack took his fears and his desire to control to his posse, his men's group at the Unbreakable Husband program. And with the help of the program and other men, he began to show up as a supportive partner. On those occasions where he slipped back into his old self, he caught himself, apologized, and made it right with Emily, keeping in mind that it takes 5 positives to make up for 1 negative. And he did. Jack learned how to mirror Emily's feelings, how to acknowledge Emily's feelings, and how to build an empathy bridge with Emily. And she began to relax. After a few weeks, she even moved back in. Together, Jack and Emily worked to dismantle the rigid expectations and rules that had once controlled their lives. They replaced them with open communication, trust, and a mutual respect for each other's autonomy. As they embraced this new dynamic, Jack and Emily noticed a profound shift in their relationship. Their journey taught them the dangers of overbearing expectations and the importance of respecting each other's autonomy within a relationship. Jack and Emily were able to overcome this challenge and nurture a love that would continue to grow and evolve with time. So there you have it. I would love to tell you that this is an isolated story and never happens. But the fact is that we can all be a little controlling in our relationships. In fact, each of the stories that I've told you over the last few weeks represent extreme versions of what happens every day in many, many, many marriages. So don't sit here thinking, thank God that's not me. Thank God it's not you that Emily didn't serve you. Or maybe she did. Maybe your wife has served you. But know that this tendency, whether it's a 2 or a 10 on the scale of being overbearing and controlling, can be changed. Don't think that Jack is the only man to go through the Unbreakable program to change. This is a real program that has had real results for men who really need help. So let's talk a little bit about what Jack went through. Let's first define what is an overbearing expectation. An overbearing expectation is an expectation we have of somebody else's behavior that limits them in some way. That's something they have not agreed to. That's not equal in the place that it comes from. So Jack's desire to look at Emily's social media feeds, text messages, and emails was coming from an authoritarian perspective, where he wanted to be in control. He wanted to know it was safe. He wanted to know that she wasn't talking to Tom anymore, if we're going to be honest. And he, underneath that, is trying to control her behavior or decisions. It's a breach of the first rule of human relations, which is we have no control over anyone or anything, except perhaps ourselves, which Jack proves later on in the story. And what happens here is the person who's receiving this behavior usually wants to please and make the other person happy. And in Emily's case, she probably felt guilty about having her affair with Tom several episodes back and succumbed and gave in. Or maybe she was even afraid. And out of fear, she cooperated on the surface, and underneath, maybe she had a whole other phone. Who knows? So the impact of overbearing expectations is the partner's sense of autonomy is restricted or stifled, and they feel they're unable to make independent choices. And one of two things happens. Either A, they just succumb and repress, which means ultimately an eruption, right? Because when we push the pressure down, it builds up, eventually it gets to the point where we can't hold it down anymore. Or we find release for this need for autonomy by creating a secret life. And I've had clients whose wives did that, who had separate phones from the ones that they shared with their spouse. They had separate lives from their married life. They would go out at night and do things saying that they were spending time with friends and family when the friends were more than friends. So the outcome of that loss of autonomy is fierce. And it also drives a tremendous amount of emotional strain. Those rigid expectations that one person has on another, on their behavior, puts a lot of emotional strain on the relationship, not only because the other person doesn't feel free, but because the person with the expectations starts to see everything through the lens of fear. So if Emily is talking to the grocer, Jack is likely to become jealous. Hey, why are you talking that way to him? Let me see your phone. Are you texting with that guy? It can develop into almost paranoia. So the strain isn't just on the person who the expectation is placed on, but there's a lot of strain on the person who's attempting to control. And of course, anytime we try to control something that we cannot control, the tension mounts more and more and more. So I already told you about how this can lead to resentment and pushback. One way to think of it is that they resist and rebel against the expectations of their authoritarian partner. Not only is it a need to express themselves, but they're rebelling against it. And what happens very often, why would someone allow themselves to be in this position and then rebel against it? Sometimes we're working out our own stuff and we pick a partner who has these authoritarian tendencies that remind us of unresolved emotions from our past, and we're hoping to work it out here. Now, ideally, if that were coming up, we would want to talk about it, right? We'd want to talk about, hey, I'm feeling triggered. You know what? This reminds me of my childhood. This reminds me of my first relationship, my first marriage. But the fact is, because trust is low and safety is low, we don't feel free to talk about it. There are barriers in the communication based on mistrust and fear. And there's a hesitancy to share true feelings or concerns. I mean, imagine if you are the recipient of the overbearing behavior and you share something that's true, you make yourself vulnerable, your partner has two choices. They can either honor the truth of your statement, or they can take that information and use it to further manage and control you. And more likely they're going to take door number two. But even if they're not likely to take door number two, you're going to be afraid that they are. So communication is going to be very limited, very superficial. On both sides, there are going to be self-esteem issues. For the person controlling, let's just open the door into their soul for a moment. The tendency is to think the controlling person is bad and the person in the recipient role is good. But understand that this is a dynamic, that the person in the recipient role chooses to hang out for this stuff. And also that they're both victims in a sense here. There's an old Greek saying that the slave ultimately becomes the master over time because the master is dependent on the slave. What that means in this situation, not that this is a master-slave relationship, but there's a dominance issue going on here, a power dynamic going on here. The person who is attempting to dominate the other is really terrified. Jack's real fear is that Emily doesn't really love him. Jack's real fear is that Emily is going to go running back into the arms of Tom or the grocer or any other person who seems more worthy than he does. He feels inadequate and unworthy underneath this. That's what's driving it. And so we need to have empathy for that and get that though the overbearing behavior is somewhat repugnant, and we certainly don't want to participate in it, that what's underneath it is something that we can all understand and relate to. And if that part of Jack can be reached, a different dynamic may be created, reached with empathy and love. And obviously, Emily has got to have some self-esteem stuff going on to hang out and allow that dynamic to continue. When we allow ourselves to be in a relationship that feels controlling and subvert our own needs and desires in order to stay in the relationship and bow down to these and the desires of the other person out of fear, something's not working. Now, there can be situations where one person might sacrifice for another, but that's not the same as subverting our own emotions out of fear. Sacrificing a goal of ours for the goal of our partner is noble and generous, and there is an expectation that similarly our partner will sacrifice and appreciate what we did for them in return. But this is a one-way street, not a two-way street. The unintended consequences are there's dishonesty in the relationship, there's avoidance in the relationship, and the targeted partner will resort to dishonesty and avoidance and passive-aggressive behavior to escape the pressure of judgment from the other partner, and ultimately judgment from themselves. On some level, they're judging themselves for allowing themselves to participate in this, for not healing whatever the open wound is that allows them to act out. There's a lot of guilt and shame in this kind of relationship. When we submit to someone who's overbearing, it's usually because they have a handle on some shame of ours. And when someone is overbearing, there's a private shame that's driving it. What do I mean by that? In Jack's case, there is shame that for his behavior earlier in episode 5 or whenever it was. I should have a listing of the episodes so I can quote them accurately. In an earlier episode, Jack literally drove Emily into Tom's arms with his bullying. And so there's shame over that. There's shame over the way he steamrolled her. And that shame is what's driving this behavior. And under that is what drove the bullying is more guilt and shame. And so to a large extent, getting to a place where we can change that involves releasing these old emotions. Cleaning up the shame, cleaning up the guilt, cleaning up the hurt, the sadness from our past, releasing old anger, releasing old frustrations so that we can start fresh, so that we can move out of this dynamic into one that's balanced, a real partnership. And when we do that, when we let go of the old baggage, create a strategy, act on it, and adjust, that's when we can embrace flexibility and adaptability. Until we release the old self, the old baggage, we can't be truly flexible. We can't be truly adaptable. As long as we're being driven by those old hurts or guilts or shames or whatever it is that's driving it, we will live in the box of those emotions. Once we let go of them and embrace flexibility and adapt to the needs of the other person as well as our own, there's room for individual growth and change. Jack, when he finally turned it around, when he went to the Unbreakable program and learned to stop being controlling with the support of his men's group, when he did some trigger release work also with the mental and emotional release program, I'm going to tell you because I know Jack. When he did those things, he was able to open up a new chapter in his relationship with Emily, and she saw that he had changed. She didn't just think, oh, look, he's putting on a good act, maybe I'll give it a try. She saw that there was an authentic shift in his behavior and dropped the divorce and came back to him. And I have actually seen this many times. And what happens in that kind of shift is Jack shows up for Emily as her partner, supporting her in her individual growth and development, helping to aspire in her dreams and her future, and trusting that she knows what's best, and trusting that she is keeping to her relationship agreement with him, whatever that is, whatever that contract is, and vice versa. And then we can let go of strict expectations because there's trust, there's intimacy, there's vulnerability. And sometimes, those trusts may be broken in small ways, but we can talk about it. When we're in a flexible and adaptable mindset, we can talk about it safely. We can say, hey, when you were talking to that guy at the grocery store, you totally ignored me, and I felt like you were having a kind of exchange with him that we don't really have anymore. You could say something like that, and Emily might respond, oh my God, I had no idea. Tell me more. What was the kind of exchange that I was having with him that you'd like to have with me? Let's work towards it. There's an ability to have that kind of conversation. When it's closed and tight, the communication is going to be more like, when you were talking to that guy at the grocery store, it made me feel like I was shut out and you don't care, and it made me really angry. And Emily's going to say, oh yeah? Well, if you didn't treat me so badly, I wouldn't have to talk to that guy. Completely different kind of communication. So there's open communication, and there can be compromise also. In the conversation about what's the attention that you're not getting that you'd like me to give, there can be compromise about, hey, you know what, when we're in the grocery store, I'd really appreciate it if you bring me into the conversation so I can be part of it. Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's a great idea. Yeah, I'll make sure that I do that. There can be all kinds of ways that there can be openness and sharing. And these things are going to foster a more balanced and supportive dynamic. Now, kids, try this at home. I would say, yes, try this at home. But you may find that you need some help. You may find, for example, trigger hacking is, unless you've been trained in it, is very hard to do on your own. And even if you've been trained in it, it's good to have an outsider, because it's kind of like cleaning out your own wounds. It's painful, and you may stop before you really clean it out because it hurts so much, and then there's still a little bit left, and you got to go back and do it again. When you have the help of someone else, even if you're good at it, they're going to make sure that you're thorough. I myself go for trigger hacking help with other coaches. I don't do it by myself very often. So if I do, it's on a very small scale. But for major areas of my life, I'll go to another coach and go for trigger hacking and get them to help me with that. We all need support and help if we want to clean the wound out thoroughly and we want it to heal well so that we can see things differently. So reach out for help. Feel free to reach out to me at rich@richinrelationship.com. Direct message me, whatever it is you like, because there's no need to either be the person who's being overbearing or to be the recipient. There's just no need. You can transform that relationship into something new, beautiful, and vibrant.